Hi, I'm Charlie Harp, and this is the Informonster Podcast. On today's episode of the Informonster Podcast, I'm going to sit down with our VP of Marketing, Jaime Lira, and talk about the whole healthcare conference first and second quarter cycle and all the things we did and all the things we saw. Well, maybe not all the things we did and saw, but a lot of the things we did and saw. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome Jaime Lira. Welcome back to the podcast, Jaime.
Thank you. I mean, how many podcasts is this I'm on now? It's kind of like SNL, too many more and I'm going to get that jacket.
Well, we could make that happen.
I can think some people might be jealous.
Well, of course. So, what do you want to talk about?
Well, the whole spring conference rotation, really. So, started in February with ViVE. Unfortunately, a week after that, we ended up at HIMSS. I say unfortunately just because I'm a marketer, and all the work associated with getting to those two places is a lot, and it's a lot of overlap, but we were always excited to be there. And then we moved forward after HIMSS with a couple of other conferences, the CMS Quality Conference and the ASTP Annual Meeting. So I think there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was your general, out of all of the conferences we went to, because obviously our spend is very different. When we go to ViVE, we don't typically have a large booth. We send fewer people. HIMSS, we send a bunch of people and have a really big booth. Qualcomm and ASTP, obviously, we're just going as attendees. But is there anything about this season that stood out to you?
I think that from myself personally, and also the feedback that I heard from others, was the conversations that happened at HIMSS were of more value, honestly. I say that because I spent more time in the booth at HIMSS this past year than I have in the past. You know, I've had opportunities to attend some of the keynote sessions, some of the educational breakouts, and I really enjoy those. But this year, for whatever reason, I ended up in the booth more and having conversations with the people that walked by. And I felt like those conversations were not just surface level. I felt like when people came up and asked a little bit more about what we did and we started really talking about data quality, they really were tuned in to what we were talking about. And not just myself, but that's really what I heard other people saying as well too, that the conversations that happened at the booth, even with some of my marketing friends that are at other booths, they said those walk-by conversations were just a little bit deeper than what they've experienced in the past.
Okay, that's very cool. When I'm at HIMSS, I'm usually trapped in a conference room for a majority of the meeting.
Yes.
I'm not going to point fingers. I'm not going to, say whose fault that is. Probably not yours. But I had a lot of really great conversations this year at HIMSS. I also got to have some opportunities to talk about data quality. I think that one of the things I've noticed this year at all the conferences, as opposed to other years, is that quality for the longest time has not been, it might be a strategic ideal, but it wasn't a tactical priority. And I feel like with all the things people are trying to do, whether it's AI or digital quality measures or more sophisticated, accurate population health, I feel like data quality is kind of moving into that quadrant of tactical priority, which is different, I think. And we had some really great conversations about that at all the different shows. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how the conferences are different, and let's open it up a little bit. Because I think when you think about things like ViVE and Health and HIMSS and AMIA and some of these other conferences, I kind of feel it's almost like they're different characters in a sitcom. If you know what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that if we start with something like Health and ViVE, would you say Health and ViVE are similar or no?
I think they're cousins.
They're cousins?
Yes.
I see Health and ViVE, there's a lot of startups. There's a lot of people that are looking for funding. Over the years, like at Health, in the early years of Health, it was a lot of startup activity. And I feel like there's kind of been this idea that more mature companies are showing up. They feel like they have to show up. I also feel like It used to be the conference where I'm like, oh, I know I'm going to get some good food and coffee at the conference. And,
Yes.
and that's trailed off a little bit. It's not quite what it was in the early days.
But do you think that's because the newness of it has worn off?
I think maybe, partially. I also think that, I don't know how sustainable that is. I think when the crowd was smaller, it's
True.
easier to have a lot of food and coffee every 5 seconds. And I think as the crowds get bigger, it's like having a company. As the population increases, the finances scale, the cost scales, and you have to make some difficult choices. But they've got better about not playing music over everybody's conversations. In the early days of Health and ViVE, it was like I was at Coachella, not at a healthcare conference. So I tried to have a conversation or give a presentation, and they're blasting some kind of music over the whole auditorium area. So we've got the cousins of Health and ViVE.
Yes.
Kind of hip, kind of new. Do you feel like we have substantial conversations at those conferences?
Not like at HIMSS.
Yeah, I think HIMSS is kind of like old reliable. I mean, I don't know that, we typically don't sell. It's not like people come up and run their credit card and they buy a product from us at HIMSS. I think we get a lot of foot traffic for the Informonsters, which people seem to love. And I think, we have a lot of good preset meetings. We have a lot of meetings with people because everybody's at the same place. And really, that's always been the benefit of HIMSS. That's why our booth is 2 conference rooms and a hospitality area, because people come, we have coffee, we sit down in a conference room and we chat. And then when you think about the other conferences, like the ASTP conference, which I started going to a few years ago, for me, that's just a great conference because all the movers and shakers are there. And you don't really see clients at a show like that. It's kind of like AMIA in a way. What you see are people that if you want to know what the heck is going on in healthcare, the people are all concentrated in one place and we're not distracted by trying to sell something or trying to buy something. And so I feel like that's a good conference. I think QualCon is like that too. You have meaningful conversations. It could lead to something strategic in the future or clue you into something that's happening in the industry, but it's not, we're not handing out swag.
True. I think some of the value with ViVE in particular is I see that kind of as the Chime Spring Conference, because Chime pairs with ViVE to put that activity on. So you do see a lot of the fellow Chime members are there at the ViVE event. So it does draw that crowd, so the CIO crowd. And I think that might be part of the reason why HIMSS is different is because it goes a little bit deeper into the informatics ranks. The people who are actually rolling up their sleeves doing some of that work show up at HIMSS and are looking for the solutions and are the ones that would actually be using those solutions. So I think that might be part of the reason why the conversation is a little bit different. HIMSS versus ViVE. I feel that ViVE, it's more of a higher level conversation about just interoperability in general and what are some strategic things that people are thinking about.
I think that, and this is from a vendor perspective, I think when you look at conferences like Chime, Civitas, a lot of these regional HIMSS, a lot of those are much more about getting to know people, getting to handle on what's going on, figuring out. I learn a lot at those conferences, whereas HIMSS is almost a much more commercial conference where it's really focused on having potential strategic conversations, some tactical, getting an opportunity to say hi to customers that happen to be at HIMSS and making sure they realize you appreciate them. Whereas a lot of these other conferences I see as less of a sales opportunity. I think like AMIA, for example, we've been going to AMIA forever, and we've been a sponsor of various scales over the years. And I've explained to the folks at AMIA that I don't really see AMIA as a sales opportunity as a vendor. I see it as more of a industry opportunity. I think Chime is kind of the same thing. I don't think you go to Chime thinking you're going to walk away and sell things. What you're really going to do is get to know people and give them the opportunity to get to know you. And if there's a there, it'll find a way, is the way I tend to think about it.
I agree. I think those are opportunities to just have a conversation about what kinds of issues people are actually dealing with right now. And, if you can solve that problem, great. And if not, you at least know who they are. You've had the opportunity to meet them. And I do see a lot of the same faces as we go around. It's nice when it's your third or fourth or fifth ViVE event or health or HIMSS, and you see some of those faces again. And it's a great opportunity to touch base and say, hey, what's new in your world? I haven't seen you in a while.
I mean, that's one of the things I really like about it too, is there's a guy I've known for years, Tom O'Connor, who every time he sees me in a trade show, he gives me a hard time, like, Charlie, you're the CEO, you're always at the trade show. I can count on you always be at the trade show. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course I'm always at the trade show. It's an opportunity for me to see people I only really get the opportunity to see at a trade show, and I get to see them all at once. And I think that's, for me as the CEO of Clinical Architecture, I think that's important. In fact, I don't think the only HIMSS I've missed in the 18 years of Clinical Architecture was the year they didn't have one. In fact, the first year of Clinical Architecture, when we really didn't have anything to sell, I had a 10 by 10 carpeted wall booth at HIMSS where I stood there with the free sign you get with the booth. And I think the swag was 15 minutes of free consulting. And I had a whiteboard. It was kind of ridiculous when I look back on it. I also remember the year that I think it was the year kind of at the tail end of COVID, where there was some people weren't too sure, and I got on the plane and I went by myself, and I was the only person in the booth. You had to wear a mask. There were the booths were like islands because they only had so many booths. And I'll tell you what, to this day, I want to say that's probably one of my favorite HIMSS. Because, there's not counting the throwing the Frisbee to the guy, because the guy across from me had a Frisbee swag. And so we got to a point where no one was around, so we would throw the Frisbee back and forth. But the people that showed up at that HIMSS, they weren't swag hunters, it wasn't a boondoggle. Yeah. They really wanted to have conversations. And I think I had some of my most meaningful conversations at the HIMSS. I think it was 2021. And I remember, although what would happen is I'd be out there at the booth, and we have the Informonsters out there that people like, the Informonsters. So we kind of protect them so people don't take them all. And every time I would go into the back of the booth to take my mask off and have a drink of water, I could hear people taking the Informonsters off hooks, and I'd come out and I'd look around like, hey, you kids, get off my lawn. But I think overall, that, we invest a lot in HIMSS.
We do.
We put a lot of energy into selecting the location of the booth and figuring out who's going to go. And I don't know, part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, other than the chance to have a conversation with you on the record.
On the record.
This is on the record. Is for people that, attend HIMSS, they've never been to it from the perspective of a vendor. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like the Super Bowl in healthcare. You get your people together, you have your rah-rah meeting, you get out there, you man the booth. I think it's a good team building experience. You get to know people when you travel with them, and you're doing something like a trade show. And I just think it's a very different experience than just going to something as an attendee.
Very much so. I mean, you feel anchored because you have that home base that you go to. I mean, because we've done other shows where we didn't have necessarily that booth presence, and it feels very different because you just kind of float around and try to meet up with people in certain places when you can, but you never really feel like you have a home when you're there. It's very different.
So while we're talking about this, I think you should also mention that, since you started in healthcare, you came to healthcare recently, you're a transplant.
I am.
And you've gotten involved with, the healthcare has a very vibrant marketing community with the Swaay conference and the Bluebird Leaders. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So this is I'm going on to my 4th year at Clinical Architecture. So I've been around to these conferences a handful of times, and what's great is some of the people that I have met through the Swaay community, which are fellow health IT marketers, and I really value that because as I'm trying to figure out the landscape a little bit, it's really nice to meet other folks who have been doing it for years and years, who are willing to share their expertise and their insight from some things. And I I do the same, right? So I've met some people that are relatively new to the industry, maybe new to the role that they're in. And if I have information that I can help them with, I'm certainly doing that. I'm actually getting ready to go to the Swaay Marketing Conference at the end of this month, so at the end of April. That will be happening out in Boston, and I'm looking forward to seeing all my peers. There's usually I feel like it's close to 300 people, like 200 and 300 people show up at Swaay. A lot of different topics. Just today, I was looking at the agenda and marking my calendar for the different sessions that I want to go to. I've had the honor of speaking on the stage there in the past. I'm not doing it this year, which is really nice because it's kind of the low-key opportunity to just relax a little bit and take in all the content. But I really feel like a lot of times those hallway conversations are what really matters, right? When you catch someone just one-on-one and have a quick like, hey, have you heard about this? Are you working on this? What are you guys doing? Like those kinds of conversations I find to be really valuable too. Although I also appreciate panel discussions, some of the unconference things that Swaay does too. I really appreciate that. And then Bluebird Leaders is relatively new for me. So I just joined that last year and I went to the conference that was out in Colorado. And that's a broader spectrum of people too. It's not all health tech marketers, but any woman really in health IT and also male allies, although that's a smaller group that shows up there. But I've met some fantastic CIOs from large health systems. I've met other people that work at fellow vendor companies, but they just work in a different role. So they might be business development or they might be product people. And then, of course, there are a small section of other marketers that show up to those things and clinicians. So I think that's really cool when you have the opportunity. I've met a couple doctors that were there. Sarah Matt wrote a book and she was promoting her book at that conference out in Colorado. And I know that she's been on the podcast talking about her book. So I just think that other groups like that are really great to help expand a community even more. And I feel like I personally have learned more about the healthcare industry just by participating in those communities. So I found that to be really valuable.
I find that the folks in that community to be very, engaged. They know a lot for being in like people like Colin Hung and folks like that. They know a lot about what's happening in the industry, and they're very they're very friendly. They're very smart. They're engaged. And whenever I get an opportunity to be on a podcast or like with Sal Marquez or Anthony Guerra. It's a genuinely nice, I really enjoy myself. They really make you feel at ease. They do a really good job. So now I know the Swaay Conference, I'm not cool enough to go to the Swaay Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the one conference they don't let me go to because I just, they don't want me to bring down the GQ quotient or whatever's going on there.
Oh, come on.
So what else, with all the stuff that you've been looking at, when you look at what people are talking about and what they're pushing on from a marketing perspective, is it all AI? What are you seeing?
I hear AI in the conversation a lot, but from a marketing aspect, I think the one thing that we all agree on is that I think AI can help you with some workflow type things, but when it comes down to telling stories and sharing content that matters, it really takes a person to communicate those kinds of things. And I can just say from experience in using ChatGPT and Gemini and a couple other tools, just asking it certain questions, it does feel very whitewashed. Like the messaging that I'm getting, it feels really bland and repetitive. And I'm like, okay, this is actually not helping. It's slowing down my process. So I think it's just too easy to use it as a crutch, and it's not something that I want to do. So I typically think of it as my intern. Yeah. So I will ask it for some research or a quick outline, and then the rest of it is what I'm filling in. And I find that a lot of my fellow marketing peers operate in a similar manner.
Okay. So if you were, if there was a startup out there and they're trying to decide if they should go to a trade show, not to recommend a specific trade show. I don't get in trouble with any of these trade shows. I don't want to get run out of town. But what would your advice be based upon your experience in terms of priorities for, how do you approach a trade show in healthcare? I mean, I could guess at a couple of things based upon what you've said, but
Well, you probably know this. I'm not sure. Sometimes I think things do just come straight to the marketing team and we address them. And I think sometimes they maybe get the whole way around to you. But sometimes people on our sales team will hear about a conference. And so then they'll just kind of kick that over to us and say, hey, do you think that we should go to this? Or they might recommend, I want to do a sponsorship for this. And then I think that's really when we take a closer look at that and say, okay, hold on. What is this conference? Who attends? How many people generally attend? And even from a vendor perspective, who's there? Like, how does it make sense for us to even appear at this conference? And most people know that it's a significant investment to be there. So if you're going to have any kind of booth or table, sponsorship, anything in addition to just a registration, that's a lot of money.
yeah.
And, I guess the checkbook here for me isn't wide open. I do have to...
No, absolutely not. It is not wide open.
I know. I have to pick and choose when I go to. So a lot of times just here, like we'll recommend maybe the first year, just one person goes and checks it out to see who's all there, what kind of activity do you see. I would rather have someone come back and say, oh my gosh, I really wish we would have had a booth there. It would have been amazing, versus spending tens of thousands of dollars and having that booth presence and come back and say, ugh, I don't really think that was a good spend of our money. So I think anybody considering conferences needs to evaluate the audience and what they really see their opportunity being, and then make that investment accordingly.
Agree. And I think for me, because people ask me all the time, they're like, well, Charlie, how is it worth it to spend all that money on a conference? And for me, I kind of think that it's PR. It's being seen and having those meaningful conversations. I don't think it's worth it to go and exhibit at a conference if you're never going to leave your hotel room, and you're not going to spend the time engaging with people. Because really, I mean, I would argue that the cost of the booth, which is non-trivial, is not less than a bunch of plane trips to try to meet with people. But the fact is, you can meet with people at trade shows and conferences, and most people are more than happy to meet if they're already going to be there. Most
Absolutely.
people have a cup of coffee or breakfast or come by the booth, and a lot of people, we always try to have a booth that's comfortable, air-conditioned, coffee, water, quiet. And I would say when you think about the investments we've made in booths over the years, investing in the quiet, investing in the air conditioning, because when people come into the booth and they sit down and you're having a conversation like, wow, it's so quiet in here. I'm not sweaty. And, and it's kind of that thing where you want people to sit down and be comfortable and take a load off. Because I remember years ago, we were in New Orleans, back when they used to have HIMSS in New Orleans. And New Orleans, the trade show hall is a mile across. And some young guy, it was when I was with the First Data Bank, and there was this young guy who was first, it was first HIMSS. He's like, man, I'm going to go to the show, and afterwards I'm going to go to Bourbon Street, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And I was kind of laughing to myself, because when we got out of that show, after standing on concrete for 6 hours or walking back and forth, I'm like, no, what you're going to do is you're going to collapse into your hotel room. Maybe the third night you'll make it out for beignets or hurricanes. But the first couple of days at a trade show, people don't realize being a vendor at a trade show, it's work. It's a lot of work.
It's a marathon.
Well, you're a party animal, so that's different for you. But for people like me, Jamie's always at whatever the cool party is, she tries to get me to go, and I'm like, I know I'm not cool enough. Although I did go to the Sphere and that InterSystems put on for their reception, and they did a fantastic job, and the show was really cool. If you haven't been to the Sphere, I definitely recommend checking it out.
It was a great event.
It was.
But in addition to that, as CEO and as being a thought leader, you're not just in the booth having conversations, you're also on stages.
Which I love doing that. I love talking about stuff. I love seeing the audience engagement. This year we had the thing with Ryan Howells and Ed Yerkson from NCQA, and the audience was fantastic. And I love doing that kind of stuff. And also even like the little hallway interviews and the podcasts. Hopefully I usually make sense when I talk about stuff, but
I think you did. I think you did.
But no, it's so I think that, there are a lot of people that dread going to trade shows, but I have to say, honestly, my team is fantastic, and I love, that feeling, that esprit de corps, when we get on a plane, we go to a place, and we're like, we're gonna do our very best. We're gonna have a good show, and there's just something about it that I like the team aspect of it. I like the collegial atmosphere of talking to people I haven't seen in a while. So I know that there's a lot of people that maybe think I'm crazy and they dread going to trade shows. But my perspective is I'm not going there to necessarily to sell. I'm not going there, I don't see it as a chore. I see it as an opportunity to connect and to be with the team. And we usually squeeze in a few halfway decent meals while we're there.
Sure. Much
to the chagrin of our budget. Anyways, so we've rattled on about HIMSS for a while. Is there anything else you want to make sure you talk about?
Well, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit more about that pre-con presentation that you did, because I wasn't able to attend that. I wasn't there yet, and you were part of that panel conversation, and I was just curious a little bit about how it was received by the audience and how, in general, the pre-conference sessions went.
So the first thing about the pre-conferences, I wasn't registered for them, so I had to convince them to let me in and prove that I was a speaker to let me in. So I had to go through that process. I did try to sneak in first, and they caught me. So I had to talk my way in. But the session was good. There were a lot of folks from the interoperability community in the session, and one of the really humbling and gratifying moments was that Ryan asked at one point, who in the audience has heard of Picky? And, it's about 100 people in the audience, and I would say 90% of them raised their hand. And for something that was a wacky idea I had 2 years ago to be something that the industry is aware of and people are talking about, was very gratifying. And, I kind of gave my perspective on data quality, on how, it's not only something that's good for AI. Data quality is the rising tide that raises all boats, whether it's digital quality measures, clinical decision support, population health, or artificial intelligence, or even a human provider trying to figure out how to take care of their patient. The quality of the data impacts all of those things in a way that is substantial. It's not a small thing. And the fact that we're at a point in the industry where we're sharing data and we realize we want the data we share to be meaningful, when I was talking about these things, seeing people in the audience nodding their heads in agreement, whether they're from the CDC or NCQA or QHIN, it's nice to see that, because I think that it gives me hope as somebody who's been in this industry for 37 years that maybe there's light at the end of the data quality tunnel, and we can emerge with something. I'll lean into the metaphor. We'll emerge from the tunnel of our history into a bright new day of analytics and meaningful support from the software we toil over.
Well played. Agreed. That's really exciting. The idea that you would share that and the audience is very familiar with the Picky framework after what feels like, in some aspects it feels like we've been working on it for a short period of time, and in other aspects it feels like a very long period of time.
I agree.
So it's exciting to see it gaining momentum and people picking up on it. And I feel like, aren't the work groups mostly established at this point?
Yeah, for the Picky Alliance, we do have the work groups. We're talking about a public health work group and maybe a social services work group. But, you talk about conferences, the flip side of HIMSS, where we're talking about these things, are some of these HL7 meetings, like the Connect-a-thons we have, where not only are people talking about it, but they're rolling up their sleeves and they're making it work. That's the other thing, too. I've been involved in AMIA for years. I've been peripherally involved in HL7, but the Picky thing has really brought me into the HL7 community, and those people are amazing. And they give their time, they give their brain power, and they invest in ideas that came from somewhere else in a way that creates a lot of value. We at the Connect-a-thon, we had a gentleman from the VA who was expanding the clinical model for medications and building his own rubrics. And for me, it's like, it's weird when you see something that you came up with years ago, and it was different back then, and see people that you've never really interacted with much before doing things with it. It's really kind of cool.
It is.
So it's kind of the other end of the spectrum, because, this, for example, was all virtual. So nobody got on a plane, nobody was wearing a suit, which is my preference, and people are just rolling up their sleeves and making things work and talking to each other about it. It's really kind of cool.
That's
all right.
great.
What else you want to talk about? Are we done?
I think we're done.
Oh my God, we're done. Well, as always, Jamie, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Anytime you want to be on, anything you want to talk about?
Well, I got to get on that 5th time so I can get my jacket.
Well, we'll see. It's got to be good. We'll see how the ratings are on this one, and we'll see if we can get you on again.
All right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Charlie Harp, and I'm with
Jaime Lira.
And this has been another exciting episode of the Informonster podcast. Thanks for listening.